Hello viewers, welcome to my channel. My name is Timothy Okwebelen. Today we're going to be looking into what I titled Medicinal, Chemist in Rational Drug Design. We're going to be looking into the brief history about classification of drugs, the definition of drugs, good and bad drugs, what makes drug good and what makes drug bad. Classification of drugs. Number one, by pharmacological effects, by chemical structure, by target system, and by site of action. I don't think there's any one of us that have never visited a doctor before. And we know one way or the other we'll fall sick and we'll visit the GP or the medical practitioner. When we are sick, what we don't know is, even though the doctor prescribed drugs after asking us some questions regarding the symptoms, what we don't know is what goes on beyond, or what goes at the back where the doctor and you is not existing. In the sense that you are in the GP's office and you're telling the GP what is wrong with you. But you don't know how the drugs, the GP, after telling him he will prescribe a drug for you and ask you to go to the pharmacy, you don't know how these drugs are produced. Before drugs are produced, before I go on to talk about the history of classification, the pharmaceutical company, first of all, have to know the named disease which they want to produce the drug for. They must know the disease. Is it anti-hypertensive drugs they want to produce, or is it anti-ulcer, or is it antibiotics, or is it anti-cancer? So first of all, the pharmaceutical company have to do what? Make a decision on what they want to produce and which disease area they are going to. The disease area and the target system, what are they targeting? Which enzymes are they targeting and which compound are they using? As we know that drugs are compounds that does what? That works with the biological systems that give us a biological response. So they want to know the compound, the structure of the compound and everything about the drugs before they start doing what? Going to the clinical trials and everything about producing the drugs. So that's why I'm going to be talking about a brief history about classification. So drugs are classified according to what the drug does. There are different classification of drugs. We group it, like I just said, anti-hypertensive, anti-ulcer, and all that. So, and as we classify these drugs, as I'm going to go through, because you can see classification of drugs here, but in a nutshell, I just want to briefly say, pharmacological effect of drugs is a classification of drug. By chemical structure, it's a classification of drug. By target system, it's a classification of drug. And by site action, it's a classification of drug. So we start first of all by defining what is a drug. In this definition, say a drug is a compound, like I defined before, which interact with a biological system to do what? To produce a biological response. Remember, a drug is a compound which interacts with a biological system to produce a biological response. So, if the drug is not a biological system or a biological systematic drug, it will not be able to produce a biological response because you're taking it inside. The moment you take the drug inside or through injection or through oral or whatever way you're taking it, it must be in a biological system because we are made up of a biological system. So since we are biologically made and everything about our body is biological, so the drug you take must do what? Be in a biological system to be able to interact with what is inside the body to give you a biological response. And that will take us to the good and bad drugs. Are there really good drugs and there are really bad drugs? I know in your mind you might say, yes, there are bad drugs and there are good drugs. But I can tell you today, something you probably might have not heard before. There are no good drugs. There are no good drugs. You know, reasons is because whether you see most times in your adverts and sometimes in your internet, or maybe your teacher might have told you before that the good drugs are the drugs you take, and then they have the bad drugs are the heroin, the hard drugs, and it doesn't follow like that. So what makes it, if a drug is a compound that interacts with your biological system to do what? To produce a biological response, then are there really good drugs? A good drug should be a drug that you would take in, and that drug will do what? Will go and do what? Cure that particular disease without giving you any side effects. But drugs, there's no drug that doesn't have a side effect. All drugs have side effects, including both the good and the bad drugs. So can you not say that the drug is good? If it's entirely good, yes, it cured you your diseases, but it left you with, there are some drawbacks. The drawbacks are the side effects. Some people have heavy side effects that sometimes the doctor have to withdraw the drug and have to prescribe another one. Even the one you prescribe will also have its own drawbacks and side effects. So it's also the bad drugs. Like the heroin, when you take it, it has a side effect on its own. When you take coffee, you know, the heroin, when you take it, you are a drug user. But when you do what? When you crave for it, when you become addicted, you become what? You become drug addicted. You become drug addict. So it's also your tea, which you take. Each time you want tea, you are a drug user. And each time you crave for that tea or coffee, you are a drug addict. Because you're craving for it, all of a sudden, because you take the tea, you are a drug user as you take it, because there are stimulants and there are drugs as well. So when you take it, you do what? You are a drug user, but when you crave for it, you want another cup of tea or a cup of coffee, you do what? You are a drug addict, but you don't know you're a drug addict. So it's also, for instance, penicillin. When penicillin was produced, penicillin is a powerful antibiotic. But penicillin today has some drawbacks. It's not able to cure all the named bacteria. Sometimes, even when you give it to patient, prescribe penicillin to patient, give it to patient, some patients do suffer some serious side effects that make the doctor to withdraw the penicillin and give them some other similar drugs. So that's some drug, and it has that side effect. So can you really say penicillin is a good drug and it's not a bad drug? So these are some of the drawbacks. And if you're looking at it, when heroin was manufactured, when it was produced, the people called it hero drug because it's a serious painkiller. They call it hero drug. They call it hero drug because it was doing some miracles on people who are on a heavy, serious pain. They're suffering some serious pain. Then when they take heroin, when the doctor gives it to them, it kills the pain immediately. So they call it a hero drug. But the drug was in the market for a period of 5 years. After 5 years, they found out people were addicted to heroin. Some people who were addicted could no longer leave the heroin. They were depending on it. They were dependable on the heroin and were drug addicts through the heroin. And they had to withdraw it from the market. Okay? So, like I said, coffee and tea and cocoa and all these beverages you take, they all contain stimulants. So when you take a coffee, you are a drug user. And when you crave for the coffee, you are a drug addict. Okay? So we cannot say there are really some good drugs, because all of these drugs suffer serious side effects. And in that way, you can never say you can't name any drug that doesn't have a side effect. And this is the drawback. So if it's an ideal drug is a drug that you deliver through the system and it will target the named disease and kill it without giving you any side effect. But there are no drugs like that. All drugs have drawbacks of side effects. So that takes us, because I asked a question, good and bad drugs, are there really good and bad drugs? And what I just explained answered the question. So what makes drug good and what makes drug bad? What makes drug good is when you take a drug, the drug goes and target the particular enzyme or the particular receptor and able to do what? Deliver a therapeutic effect and kill and do what? And heal you or cure you without any side effect. But there's none that can do that, cure you the disease without leaving you a side effect. So, like I just said, there are no really any good drug. If I should put it like that. So we come to classification of drugs. How are drugs classified? Drugs are classified. Drugs are classified. That's why I said to you, pharmacology is what the body does to the drug. Now, drugs are classified according to pharmacological effects of drugs. There are some drugs which are grouped together and classified according to their pharmacological effect. So we're looking at different classes or classification of drugs under pharmacological effects. We have antihypertensive drug. You know, people who suffer hypertension, this is their class of drug, antihypertensive drug. Then they have anti-ulcer drugs for people who have ulcers. They have anti-cancer drugs. Then they have analgesic. Then they have antibacterial, which is antibiotics. Okay, these are different classes under pharmacological effect because it has this drug under this antihypertensive. It has a pharmacological effect. Under anti-ulcer, it has a pharmacological effect. Under analgesic, it has a pharmacological effect. So this is how it is classified. Then number two, that's number one, by the way. Number two, by chemical structure. It found out that some drugs they have the same chemical structure, similar chemical structures, but they have different therapeutic functions. So they are classified according to their chemical structures. You know, some have a methyl group, this one have a methyl group, this one have a hydrogen group, this one have a double bond alkane or double bond alkane. You know, just like that, they're classified together. So it's classified according to chemical nature of drugs. Some drugs have the same chemical structure but different therapeutic effects. They have the same chemical structure, but they have different therapeutic effects. The same chemical structure, but different chemical. So you're not looking at the chemical structure, similar compound. The skeleton is almost the same, but they have different therapeutic effects. Okay? So that's how that one is. So we're looking at the common skeleton of drugs. They have penicillin, barbiturates, opiates, steroids, and catecholamine. They have the same skeleton, the same structure. You know, they have an organic structure or structural compound. When you have the structure of a compound, they look similar, but they have. If you look at the penicillin is for antibiotic, though the penicillin and barbiturates have almost the same chemical structure, yeah, and the opiates almost the same chemical structure. Steroids almost the same chemical structure. Catecholamine almost the same chemical structure. But they found out that they have different therapeutic functions. Penicillin is an antibiotics. It's good, but barbiturate is a painkiller. You see, barbiturate is a painkiller. Then I have opiates and I have steroids also. You can use steroids as a topical cream. Okay? And some people use it to build their muscles and all that, they get addicted to it. So they have different types of therapeutic function, but they are grouped under the same chemical structure. Then they have by target system. These drugs are drugs that target in the same target system. They are produced to target the same system. So you have them classified according to the target system, the chemical messengers. We have chemical messengers in the system. We have neurotransmitters. These chemical messengers carry messages as you take your drugs to where it's going finally. Take it to the right enzyme, to the right target system where it's going. So they have the antihistamine and the cholinergics. They are antihistamine, some of them target the system, antihistamine, and the other one targets cholinergics. Okay? So that is an example of that one. Then they have by site of action. By site of action. These are drugs that target the same site of action. Example, enzymes or receptor. So you have some drugs. When you produce a drug, some of these drugs, though different types of drugs, it's either it targets the enzymes or it targets the receptor. So there are some group of drugs that target the enzymes. Okay? There are some of them that target the receptor. You know, receptor enzymes. They have some receptors, they have some enzymes. So they target some receptor enzymes or receptor. So some group of drugs, this one can produce antihypertensive or anti-ulcer, but it targets the same enzyme or the same receptor. No, that is what I'm trying to explain to you. Enzymes or receptor. So there are different types of drugs that target enzymes, and there are different types of drugs that target receptor. So this is exactly what happened when a medicinal chemist is producing a drug or is trying to produce a drug in a rational drug design. Before you get a drug, you have to first design it. People think there's only the architect that draws the building. When you talk about designing a drug, you design a drug like an architect draws a building, or a structural engineer draws a building. You also design drugs like that. You have to first of all go screening, get the medicinal leaf in order, the guide compound, do computational chemistry, be able to determine the name of the compound and the structure of the compound, and begin to design it, get the structure of the compound and also the name disease, and be able to structure it in such a way, if it's binding there and there. That's how you design a drug before you start doing your formulation and the rest of them. So ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to the end of the lecture. Like I said, it's going to be a brief lecture. But before I conclude, I'll just say it again, the name of the topic, Medicinal Chemist in Rational Drug Design. I talked about the brief history about classification of drugs. I also defined drugs as a drug is a compound which interacts with the biological system to produce a biological response. I mentioned about good and bad drugs, and they are really good drugs. All drugs suffer side effects. I mentioned it. What makes drug good and what makes drug bad? I mentioned it. And I also talked about classification of drugs by pharmacological effects, by chemical structures, by target system, and by site of action. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much, because spending your time listening to this lecture is a good thing, So I will advise you to subscribe to my channel, Timothy Ekwebelem. And when you subscribe to my channel, you'll see a bell by the side. Just click on the bell and you will be receiving alerts all the time whenever I give a lecture. You will see it in your YouTube website. Thank you very much. Remember, my channel is Timothy Ekwebelem. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.